Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Farming Focus, the podcast for Southwest farmers brought to you by Cornish Mutual. I'm your host, Peter Green, and today we're talking about the challenges of farming alone. In this episode, we're opening up an important and sometimes difficult conversation about how challenging it can be to work alone on farm and how this can impact on our mental well-being. Farming, as we all know, can be one of the most rewarding jobs in the world, but it can also be incredibly isolating and stressful. Long hours, financial pressures, unpredictable weather make it really difficult with the working environment that we're dealing with and the responsibility of running a business that can often fall on one person's shoulders. Today, we'll explore what it really means to face those challenges, break down the stigma around talking about mental health, and share some really powerful personal stories. We'll also look at practical ways to manage stress and highlight the support that's out there for farmers, their families, and rural communities. Joining me to discuss this topic are Emma O'Sullivan, founder of the DPJ Foundation, a charity dedicated to supporting mental health in agriculture, and Cornish farmer James Warwick, who'll share his own experiences and talk about the importance of speaking up. Emma, welcome to the show. Could you tell us a bit about the DPJ Foundation and the story behind it?
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much for having me. So DPJ Foundation was founded 9 years ago. I found myself in July 2016 faced with the suicide of my husband, who was an agricultural contractor. I'm a farmer's daughter myself and a pretend sheep farmer myself these days, what I do alongside my full-time job. But, it was something that when faced with that, I was really, 27, I had two very small children at that point. And it really quite honestly shook us, myself, and what I realised quite soon after was the whole community was completely shaken to the core, really. Although what was the worst part about it was actually it wasn't overly surprising within our community. There were lots of other suicides that had happened within our farming community, and it was something that was actually sadly quite normal within our very small rural community. So I decided to do something to try and combat what was happening in our community and set up the foundation in my husband's name. So my husband was Daniel Picton Jones, and we set up the DPJ Foundation, which now offers mental health support to people in the farming community, and not just people who are farming, but also their families and friends and colleagues as well are supported through the work that we do in the charity.
Thank you so much for sharing that story. I'm sure, although you've shared that story before, it's no less painful when you do have to share it. So really appreciate you coming on and talking about that with us. James, it's great to have you on the podcast. Please, can you introduce yourself and your farm business?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me on. So I farm just outside of Bude in North Cornwall. I run the farm alongside my grandparents. We're running around about 30 pedigree South Devon cows and 350 ewes. We're a mixed livestock farm.
Brilliant. And are you hailing from Bude originally?
No, you'll probably tell by my accent that I'm not from around here. I'm originally from Cambridgeshire, so I grew up in a town called St Neots. Nan and Grandad moved down here foot and mouth year, so it was all a bit up in the air. I don't remember it. I wasn't old enough to remember that. But yeah, I made the move 9.5 years ago to come down and help Nan and Grandad run the farm, and then slowly, as the years have gone by, take over more and more.
You've naturalised as a Cornishman almost.
No, I wouldn't say that. My partner is Cornish through and through, and she and her family always say that I shall never be a true local.
I joked with my wife that it takes 3 generations.
There's no hope. No.
So thank you for that. As I mentioned in the introduction, those farmers listening will know how rewarding a vocation it can be. But just taking the flip side of that coin, it can really test us with the isolation that often comes with running particularly smaller or lower margin operations. James, can you just tell us about your experience of spending, long amounts of time by yourself?
It's hard. There's no beating around the bush. There's times where you go without seeing anyone. we like especially busy times at lambing, calving. We block calve and block lamb all around the same sort of time. So March, April, May can be incredibly difficult and lonely. And you get a few bad days, a few bad days of luck or whatever, and your mind starts to start playing games with you, and it's difficult, and it's something that you think will get easier as you get older and you get more experience with everything, but it's especially where we're to here, it's very, very remote, and it can be quite challenging at times.
Yeah, there'll be a lot of farmers listening in the southwest who are anything but farming on the urban fringe. I've got friends up towards Cheshire who are farming, and they feel like they live in a town. And for many of our listeners and Cornish Mutual members, that simply won't be the case. Thank you for sharing that, James. So, Emma, we've heard a bit about James's experience. Is that a familiar story to you with your, foundation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we hear from huge amounts of people who are going through very similar experience to James, where they spend huge amounts of time on their own, and I think going back to sort of my childhood, I was spent, we used to have huge sort of gatherings around sort of silage season, and there used to be quite a lot of people around at different times of the year with farming, but times have changed, and, even to the family dynamics on the farm have changed, where very, very rarely do you get farmers' wives at home anymore. A lot of people go off to find work off farm, so that can really add to that. And then, like James mentioned, all it takes is a couple of bad days of poor weather maybe, or issues with the livestock, and that can really kind of tip you over the edge a little bit. And it's a really common theme across the whole sector, really, no matter where you are. And it's quite interestingly, actually, no matter where you are in the world as well. And this isn't just an issue for farmers in the UK. This is a worldwide issue. Ultimately, isolation is one of the biggest problems facing our sector, and this is why more important than ever is those kind of moments of us being able to get together and kind of being able to kind of pull together and check in on each other. I think is really important. We talk in the charity about how we all got a bucket, and we all carry these buckets around on our heads that are kind of invisible, and the bucket can get full, and the fuller the bucket gets, it overflows eventually, and that's when we start to feel, signs of mental illness, anxiety, depression, and even just, feel low mood and that kind of thing. But what's really important is understanding that isolation impacts that bucket and can add to it. But we've also got a tap on our bucket as well, and being able to understand what releases that pressure on our buckets is really important. And being sociable and talking to other people is a really good release of that bucket.
Yeah, I really like that analogy of a bucket, which we fill and which can apply pressure, and that we can empty by using a tap. That's really powerful image. I'm also struck by what you were saying there, Emma, about this not just being a UK problem. I've just had a farmer from Australia come and stay with me from Queensland, just west of Brisbane, and he's looking into this exact topic. It's a huge issue in Australia, and I know New Zealand as well. So it's good that people are looking at it, but it just underlines the scale of the problem, I think. There's often a stigma around talking about mental health, and perhaps more so in rural communities. People maybe prefer to use the term mental fitness or well-being to maybe soften that. Emma, why do you think it can feel difficult, and how do you feel this broader conversation has developed and evolved in recent years?
I think, I certainly have seen huge developments in the way we talk about mental health and mental illness, and the openness of people. I've seen huge, leaps and bounds really over the last 9 years since I started the charity. But I do think we've got a long way to go. I think one of the biggest barriers facing our community is that it's a very close-knit community. So, for example, everybody in my area knows me as Emma Bullhook. That's the name of the farm. They know my dad, they knew my grandfather, they know everybody. So the minute I start admitting something and opening up, well, everybody and their uncle and cousin knows about it, because we're all kind of connected. Whereas in my day job, as a teacher, I go to my school, I'm in a new school as well, so it's quite new. New people I'm working with, they don't know me quite as well, they don't have that same connection. So being able to open up a little bit is sometimes a little bit easier with people you don't really know. And ultimately, I think that the idea that we kind of, when you're opening up within our community, and we're opening up to the people that have known us, since some of us since we were toddlers, us, or no, I mean, James joked about how he's not a real Cornish resident yet and things. That is the crack of it, essentially, isn't it? Is that we are very well known within our communities, our parents, our grandparents, and it's a big thing being able to open up and admit that you are struggling. And it's difficult as well because of kind of the generational aspect of it. Our parents and our grandparents went through, you mentioned foot and mouth, that was a huge thing for farmers to go through. Well, they managed, so why am I the one that's struggling, and why am I the one that's kind of, really we're in good times in comparison to some of the things that have happened over the years, and why am I the one that can't get through it? And there's just so many different elements to that stigma. But you're right, it is changing, and there are kind of like really sort of leaps and bounds in the way that people talk about it. Things like this wouldn't have happened years ago. We wouldn't have been having a conversation like this. And when I sort of started talking about mental illness and mental health just after Daniel passed away, everyone was a bit like, oh, okay, she's going to go out and talk about this. And I was like, yeah, I am going to do this, because we've got to, because if we don't go out and talk about it, it's going to continue to be this hidden thing that is deemed to be something that is bad. It's not, nobody's going through it, when realistically we're all going through it, we just don't talk about it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I can hear some people that I know responding to one part of what you said there in your answer, along the lines of, the previous generations have gone through some pretty tough stuff, foot and mouth, etc., and they coped with it. And I can hear some people saying, yeah, why is it that this generation can't? And I think that's a challenge, and that's something that we maybe need to be able to articulate and explain, and I don't have an answer for that, so I'm interested in either of you coming in on that in just a second. But I think the other thing that strikes me, and I don't think it'll be lost on some of our listeners, is I 100% agree with what you said there, Emma, about the connectedness of the rural community, and particularly the farming community, and the idea that there's an interest and people know about other people's business. But we're talking about isolation, and this is an isolated industry. So how do we square that circle? We're talking about an industry that's, lives hand in glove with the people in their parish, but at the same time, we don't feel we can talk to them about certain things. James, I'll come to you first, and then perhaps Emma, if you come back on either of those points.
I am very, very fortunate that I have a fantastic support group of friends around me, which I will be open as I can be, that without that group of friends, I perhaps wouldn't have been here to record this podcast. And yeah, they mean the absolute world to me. And I'm very, very fortunate that when I am struggling, or if any of us are struggling, we know that we can pick the phone up and say, I'm struggling. That's all we'll need to say, and the other one will say, right, okay, well then let's talk, let's go through it and see what the actual problem is, and see what we can do to lighten the load, shall we say? Yeah, it's difficult because you don't want to burden people, I suppose, is another thing. You don't want to feel like everyone's got their problems and everyone's got their struggles in life and stuff, and sometimes, and that's one thing that I first sort of struggled with was, I don't want to tell anyone because it's a burden, and I don't want to put any more stress on anyone else. But you're not a burden, and people are there to help. That's our natural way of us humans, is we want to help. And I think people, they need to, I don't know how to say this right, but you're not a burden, and your real friends will support you through anything.
That's certainly been my experience. I've had a few issues to deal with in the last couple of years away from the farm, and actually my friends, they almost want to carry that burden with me. They want to know, and they come back and they check in to see how that burden is going. So I absolutely understand what you're saying there, James, and again, really appreciate you being so open and honest. Emma, any thoughts on that, and any thoughts on this piece around the sort of contradiction almost between sort of the close-knit community but the isolation existing alongside one another?
Yeah, I think what James is saying is right about being able to have those people to lean on. I think one of the biggest barriers really to kind of people asking for support is, and not knowing how people are going to react, I think, is a huge part as well. And ultimately, I think that there's a lot of kind of concern of, oh, am I going to say the right thing? Am I going to say the wrong thing? Am I going to make it worse? And, we've all had those times where we've picked up on a mate and we're like, oh, there's something that's not right. And you can, they're not themselves. You pick up on those little things. And sometimes it's like, well, I don't want to make it worse. And, am I going to be digging a hole for this person or whatever? So it's just understanding that actually if you're concerned about someone or you're worried about somebody, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to fix it. You don't have to make it better. You just need to be there. And being able just to be there to listen is so important, because I might correct me if I'm wrong, James, but I would imagine a huge amount of what your friends are doing were just being there for you, checking in for you, listening to you, and just checking in that you're okay. They're not there to do, right, let's do this and make this better. I'm going to fix this for you. We don't have to fix anything. And if anything, it doesn't work doing it that way. It's just being that listening ear, which is really, really important. And I think that's kind of a huge part of it. And then sort of going to your other point then about kind of how we are, isolated but connected in that sense. I'm stubborn. Anyone who knows me will tell you that I am one of the most stubborn people ever. And that has got me in many, many places and in many situations, which I will forever be proud of. But it's also got me in a lot of problems at times, because of my stubbornness has meant that sometimes I won't open up and I'll sort of keep things to myself. And I think as a sector, massive generalization, I think we're quite a stubborn bunch of people, but I also think we're really proud, and we're proud of who we are and where we come from and what we do. And a huge amount of that, being able to admit and make those connections, is kind of pulling back that pride a little bit, which I think is really difficult. And I think it goes back to this like this whole thing of generations before us. I really do. I think that there's a lot of work to unpick, and we mentioned it a couple of times about how previous generations have been through certain things, but we need to like not underestimate what we're going through right now. What we're going through is hard. And in the last 10, 15 years, things are difficult. Times have changed and they are really difficult. And they might not be the diseases that perhaps our, grandparents and parents went through before, but the financial element of things, even the things towards kind of like social media pressures and things like that, all of that is stuff that generations before us have not been through. So it can't compare. And I think that we are connected, but we're connected in such different ways. Years ago, I used to have to go, I say that years ago, I'm not that old, but years ago when my grandfather used to have to go and drive down the road or walk down the road to go and see his neighbour to ask him a question. And I remember him telling me stories about organising, like they were contractors and he was organising the silage and he'd go to the farms to go and work it out. Well, now you don't even have to speak to somebody. You can just drop a text. And that in itself, don't get me wrong, I like texting as much as the next person, but it's not that connection. It's not the same human connection as somebody ringing you up or talking to you face to face and saying to you, what's going on? Are you all right? I've noticed you're not yourself at the moment. And I think that connection is really, really important. We're connected in lots of other ways. If we finish doing something here on the farm, everybody knows about it because you can see it and there's photos and all sorts of things,
Yeah. So the first part of your answer gave me a bit of a wry smile, because you've said exactly what my wife levels at me. I'll just stop just sort of short of saying it's a criticism, but I'll often try and solve things when she's telling me about her day, and actually she'll say, I don't necessarily want you to solve it. Sometimes I just want you to listen.
Yeah.
And that's so powerful.
It's really powerful. And so this is part of kind of like one of the aspects of the charity that we do is we have a 24-hour call line that people can call up. And, when people call up our call line, we don't solve their problems for them. We just listen to them. And more often than not, you don't have to say hardly anything. Sometimes it's just a matter of just being there, being that listening ear. And within half an hour, they're like, oh, do you know what? I feel so much better. And just to be that person to listen is hugely important. And don't try and fix it. Things, you can only fix things yourself, and that will work out eventually when you're ready for it. But it's not the time. Just listen.
I would agree with that 100%. There's times that I've been on the phone to a friend and gone, we've been on the phone for 15, 20 minutes, and then all of a sudden you start piecing things together and going, well, actually, it's not quite as bad as what I first thought it was. And oh yeah, well, if I move that bunch of stock or I sell that here or whatever, then I've got a bit of money to come in there, or it's you just need someone to listen for you to work stuff out.
Absolutely. I may have said this before on the podcast, but I can't recall. Somebody once said to me, the most helpful thing you can do when you're listening to someone is to kind of establish beforehand, do you want me to just listen? Do you want me to agree? or do you want me to try and help you find a solution? If you can establish that up front, actually that can be really powerful. James, I heard you on the Meet the Farmers podcast recently, and you said things are going well, which is fantastic, but not every day is good, not every day is easy. And that really resonated with me. Can you tell us about any times that perhaps haven't been quite so good, or moments when you felt overwhelmed? And importantly, how did you cope when that happened? You've mentioned a little bit about your friends and that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, since I did that podcast, and don't get me wrong, I love what I do. Every day is different, and farming is fantastic. I want to be as positive as I possibly can be, but there is times where it is horrifically bad, and since I did the podcast back in July, August time, we were hit with something quite terrible within our flock of sheep. Our lambs were just dropping down dead. I think we lost 50 or 60 within, I think, 7 to 10 days or something like that. Bearing in mind, we'd only got sort of 300 lambs to sell and couldn't put a finger on it. And I think the first day I went out, there was like 3 dead in the field. And I was like, right, okay, well, that's sheep for you. We'll put that down to just bad luck. They'd just recently been shorn as well. So I thought, well, maybe it was a bit of hypothermia. They perhaps got a chill and that might have killed them. So I housed them for the evening or for the night because it was quite a rough day. And I went back in the shed and there was 10 dead all over the shed. And I was like, I have got no idea what's going on here. So we post-mortemed them and that didn't really come back with any answers. And they just kept dying. And I was pulling my hair out. I'm really, really guilty of seeing everything as as money then. So every time I lost a lamb, I couldn't help but think that was 130, 150 quid. And the numbers just kept stacking up. And in the end, it was like we've lost like 7 or 8 grand's worth of lambs, which to us as quite a small fish in a big ocean is quite a big lot of lambs. And it would help to go towards paying a lot of bills. And yeah, it just, I didn't cope very well. My partner Alicia was here and she was there doing her best to sort of keep everything moving and it was really quite difficult. And then just as we thought we'd got over the worst, they started dying again and we just couldn't quite work out what was wrong. And then all of a sudden it stopped. And I mean, my following on social media, I had a lot of people saying to me that they were struggling with acorn poisoning, which I didn't sort of think it was that, but towards the end it perhaps could have been, but I think it was just a mix of worms, cocci, pastorella, acorns, and it just had a massive effect on them.
Just a perfect storm.
Perfect storm for that. And
so you talked about your partner sort of manning the fort a little bit there and leaning on friends, and those are things that really helped.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that I can't stress enough how much that helps me. Going back to what Emma said about a generational thing, there's quite a big difference in the age gap between me and my grandparents. So they don't seem to stress and worry quite as much as what I do about things. I take quite a lot of pressure and responsibility of the business on myself. And when we're losing lambs like that, and I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore, they're sort of going, well, let's sell everything, and you don't have the stress, because they're at that time of life where they don't want the stress, and they don't necessarily understand the stress that I'm going through with it.
That's a really interesting piece that you've highlighted there. There'll be a lot of people farming in the Southwest who are in partnership with different generations, whether they're older or younger. And actually that empathy can get more difficult when it's across generations and it's with somebody who's at a completely different stage of life, may not have children, may have children may have left, may have no debt, may have lots of debt. There are lots of different variables, and actually the influence of the stage of life can really impact on how able people are to maybe support us. It's a real challenge. So Emma, how can we've heard a little bit about James's situation and how he was supported, but with your experience from the DPJ Foundation, how can friends, family, neighbours recognise when someone might be struggling, and what can they do to help? Because some people might be quite defensive if they're asked directly about their state of mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, ultimately, the people the best. And I know I touched on this a bit earlier, but it's spotting those kind of little signs in people that is different, those changes. So, for example, it could be somebody who's usually kind of quite outgoing, and perhaps you see them in a regular place every week. All of a sudden, they stop doing that. Or maybe it's the opposite end. They start doing something really frequently that is really out of character. So, it's looking for those like little signs and symbols. So, when my husband was alive, it sounds ridiculous, but a kind of real telltale sign for him was his hair would go a little bit wild, his beard would kind of go a little bit, not that he sort of shaved very often anyway, but it was kind of little things like that where he just didn't take care of himself, and you could really sort of see, right, okay, that's he was in that kind of point where things were so bad that he just couldn't even think about taking care of himself. So looking for those little signs in people that give you that indication that something's not right. And we've all got that gut instinct, and I think following that gut instinct is really important. And if you have that gut instinct, use that and speak to somebody. And I think, like I mentioned, don't be afraid to ask people, look, I've noticed things, you're not yourself or whatever. And you might very well get the answer of, I'm fine, leave me alone. And in that case, you kind of just got to take a step back at that point, but then try again at a later date. Don't give in if you've still got that gut feeling. Because when that person is ready to talk, if you're putting those feelers out there that you're there for them, eventually they will be able to talk. And there's an old age saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And, you're never going to force anybody into opening up and talking to you. But by giving them the opportunity to sort of say, look, I'm here if you need me. If you want to speak, I'm there, then, that's really important. But what I would say as well is sometimes people find it easier to speak to people who aren't involved in their situation. So people who are not kind of directly, friends and family, it's easier to open up. So that's when, organizations, like ourselves and lots of other organizations out there are able to offer support in a confidential way, where people can access that and they can offload to somebody who they don't, they're not directly related to. And there's no harm in kind of just saying to a mate, look, I am really concerned. I'm here to talk, but if you don't want to talk to me, then, there's DPJ Foundation, there's FCN, there's RABI, there's all these organizations out there that you can go and speak to should you need to, and offering that support out there. And what I would say is don't give up. If you've got that feeling that something isn't right with somebody, don't get to the point where you're obviously irritating them, but just drop that a message saying, look, just thinking of you. If you want to chat, you know where I am. Even just going around and having a cup of tea and, making conversation about anything other than, that concern, it all there. It all helps because you're there for that person by their side. And what I would say is try and do it in a place that's most natural. So some of the best conversations happen in the cab of a tractor because you're sitting side by side, you're concentrating, you're not kind of sitting, there's nothing worse than sitting opposite somebody and it's kind of like an intense conversation, but when you're having those conversations while, you're walking the land or you're checking the sheep or milking the cows or whatever, those are the best times to have those conversations because they don't feel so intense, they're not so pressured, and it's a little bit easier. We use the tagline with DPJ of share the load, and that's what we really, encourage people to do, is just to share that load essentially.
Yeah, really important. Great. Thank you so much. And Emma, you talked briefly about other organisations that are available. There's FCN, there's RABI, there's Yellow Wellies, there's DPJ, any number that people can contact and should contact. And down in Cornwall, I know that we've got Farm Cornwall who do some really great work as well. So yeah, please do just make sure that you do search for the organisations if you do need to talk and that you get in touch with them. We're nearly at the end of the episode. So my final question to both of you, if you could each give one piece of advice to someone really feeling the pressures of farming life right now, what would it be? Emma, you first.
I think for me, I think you've both sort of touched on the idea that, we all have these things that we do to be able to make us feel a bit better and kind of empty that bucket. And I mentioned the bucket and I mentioned the tap, but it's understanding that tap and what empties your bucket. And for me, I think if I've got one piece of advice, it's identify what empties your bucket and what switches that tap on. Talking is definitely one part of it, but we've all got different things that help us feel better about ourselves and make us feel good. And it's identifying that and making sure you do it. I think we're all too easy to be like, we're too busy, I can't do this, I can't do that, and I'm guilty of that as much as the next person. But once you've identified what that thing is, whatever it might be, whether it's me, I love to go for a cold swim, and I used to like running, I'm going to try and take it up again, and it's different things like that. Whatever that might be, identifying it and making sure that you do it. And it doesn't matter whether anyone else agrees with it. It might be, I've met or known numerous people over the years who do all sorts of weird and wonderful things to empty their bucket. And one chap I met many years ago who I'll never forget, his thing was, at the end of the day, he had a prize bull down in the shed that it was like his pride and joy, and he'd just go and sit and have a cuddle with his bull, and that made him feel better, just having a cuddle with his bull. And like, that's what made at the end of a really difficult day, or if he'd had something that had happened that day, that's what he'd go and do, because that made him feel better. And I think if you can identify that and do it, then that's going to be, that's half the battle in itself, and make that time for you, because you are important, essentially.
Yeah, great tip. Thank you so much. And James, how about you? One piece of advice for people perhaps who have reached out and are maybe struggling.
Yeah, well, what Emma said was about the chap that went and gave his bull a cuddle, and that I love my cows more than anything, and my dogs as well. So
apart from your partner.
Well, and my partner as well. Yeah. You had to put that in, didn't you? That was
Someone needed to, James.
If she listens to this, then it's
he's going to be sleeping with the cows.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, especially in the summer. There's no better thing than to go up on a summer's evening and the cows are all there grazing, and you just walk around them, and you've just got to make time for these things. People like Emma says, I've never got time for that. I've never got time for that, but there's always time to do stuff like that. And this time of year, obviously, we're recording this in December. Days are shorter, so this is the ideal time to go off and spend time with family and friends, and go and do some stuff in the build up to Christmas. And that's what me and my partner have done in the last couple of weeks, which has been fantastic.
Right. And I know I really like that piece around making time. I can visualize May evenings when you've just done first cut silage, the grass is down, it's warm, it's still, it's just, there's an amazing smell in the air, and it just feels so good. And those are the evenings that you've really got to make that time, particularly to go out. But we're not just talking about that time, we're talking about year round. And I know we had Eddie Rickson on the podcast a number of series ago who talked about going from surviving to thriving. And he talked about how for him, that thing which really worked was about having a sit spot. So one place on his farm that he went every day for 10 minutes and to just be mindful and to take a moment and to take it in and to really just enjoy being there in that place and be really present. So that's another a really great tip. Thank you both so much for a fantastic discussion. It's been so enjoyable, and it's not an easy topic to discuss. So I really thank you both for being so open. But I think it's been a great conversation, and hopefully there's some ideas there that our listeners can take away. So Emma O'Sullivan, James Warwick, thank you so much for being on the show.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.
We come now to this episode's showstoppers. It's never easy to distill the whole conversation that we just had, but in this episode, there were so many nuggets that Emma and James shared with us. I think the first piece that comes to mind is around the bucket, that really lovely image that Emma shared about how sometimes the bucket that we balance on our head, the invisible bucket, can get so full and it can apply so much pressure that it can feel almost unbearable. But we also have a tap on that bucket which can be emptied and which can lighten the load. So I think that's just a really useful image to hold in our minds. The second thing that really stuck with me is about what works for you. So this is the personal piece of how we can avoid things getting too much for us. So when we're thinking about what works for us, it's understanding whether it's a case of needing time, whether it's a case of needing to get perspective, whether it's a case of needing to share. There will be different things that work for different people to help us to manage our headspace and the load that we're carrying. So do try and take some time and maybe even talk to family, friends, colleagues about what works for them or what they think works for you and get their reflections on that point. But finally, there's this piece about supporting other people. And Emma talked about looking for signs, about respecting if you're asked to stand back, but not necessarily giving up. Make sure that we're available and that we choose the time and the place where we talk to people. But the big thing, the message which has really stuck with me, is about listening. It's a message which has gone through all of the series that we've done, Farming Focus, that it's so important to take the time to listen to other people. And in this context, we're thinking about 3 ways of listening. There's just listening, just being there, just helping someone to share their load. There's listening and agreeing and supporting someone and affirming what they're saying. And there's listening and trying to find a solution. So there you have it, different ways of listening and different ways of helping, whether it's us or other people.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.
Join us next week for a bonus episode when we'll be looking at strategies to manage stress on the farm. We'd love to hear from you with any feedback you have about the podcast or questions and suggestions for the show. So send us an email to podcast@cornishmutual.co.uk. Check out the show notes for more information on today's episode, including the link to our podcast disclaimer. You've been listening to Farming Focus, brought to you by Cornish Mutual. I've been Peter Green, and until next time, it's goodbye from me and everyone in the Cornish Mutual podcast team.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.